What's up, y'all? Hope you're all good and in great spirits. Today, I got business advice from an admittedly poor businessman. So, I think my experience as a businessman that was successful. Actually, I have had some good stuff. Not anything major, not businesses, but I've had come ups. I bought a lily pad for $5, dried at PetSmart, and I threw it in my pond. And the pet store that was my favorite pet store had a trade-in credit where you would get 50% store credit for whatever you brought in. And so I would buy these discus fish like at a quarter size for $25, and then I would grow them out like this big, and they would be beautiful, and then sell them back for 175, $200. And what I would feed them is earthworms. Like I would just throw all the compost in one area, and I would dig around there, and I would always get earthworms. And then I'd like put them in napkins for a day sometimes to let the dirt come out. And then I started figuring the dirt was roughage. And so I just threw them in like fresh, and that's what they ate, and they got huge. And then the lily pad I bought for $5, and the lily pad grows like in a rhizome. I think it's a rhizome. So it grows like a stick, and lily pads come off it, and the stick just keeps getting longer and longer, and new lily pads come off it, right? And I was getting $20 for each of those, and I must have got like, I don't know, at least 100 over the lifetime of the plant. I still got the plant. And this is like a 20-year-old plant now. So 100 times 20, probably $2,000 off that $5. When I was 12, and this kind of trips me out about, like, I'll look at my kids and then I'll think of myself. And sometimes I think that at 12 years old, and I'm not talking about like crime and stuff, because I felt like I was way more sophisticated than my kids are at 16, 15, maybe even 17 and 18. Their job is to get good grades. I pay them for good grades. All the other stuff they just got to do. Garbage, weeds, yard work, and they don't get paid for that. They get paid for good grades. But me, you know what I would get paid for? At 12 and 13 years old? One, my uncle would make me come to his house and clean every fucking window for $20. This other dude, he would give me $20 to pass out like 1,000 flyers. This is when I was older, like 14, 15. But when I was 12, 13, I used to get up at 4:30 in the morning. And this big truck would pull up to my house, and they would dump 2 bundles of newspapers in my driveway. And I would go out, and then I'd bring them into the living room and cut the little plastic thing off. And then when you got a paper route, they would tell you, okay, you got to fold them this way, and then put the rubber band this way. If it's raining, you put them in this bag and tie it up. And they would give you this basket that was made of cloth, like a very heavy-duty cloth, and it had the logo of the newspaper. And most newspaper boys were kids, right? Boys. It's probably the same age. I know other homies that, like, they did it as a group. They had several paper routes, and they got together every morning and split up and took turns, and they did it as a team. One of them ended up going, to the big house. But anyways, the route I had was in a sketchy neighborhood. It was in Oak Park in Sacramento on the north side of Broadway. That was kind of like the black area. And then when you crossed Broadway, it was kind of mixed. And then when you got past 12th Avenue, it was mostly raza. So there was like a little kind of difference in the neighborhood, right? And so the area where I delivered was around like Sac High, next to Broadway. From Broadway to like Sac High. And there was this one house at the end of my route. I did these apartments that were where Broadway meets Alhambra. There's a KFC there, and then these brick apartments behind it, and then next to that was the Sacramento Food Closet, which they sold to University of the Pacific recently, because that's not a poor neighborhood no more. It's all the black folks and the brown folks, they've pretty much been pushed out by UC Davis and the city to make it a like college campus type community. So there's UOP now, McGeorge School of Law, and UC Davis that took over that neighborhood. But back then, that was my paper route, right? And in the 80s, you were always hearing about satanic cults and how they were kidnapping people and killing them to sacrifice them. And then, other kids were saying how, they saw this thing, Faces of Death, and there was these Satanists doing these horrific things to people. And so there was a lot of hysteria around it. And I was seeing it and being influenced by it. So I kid you not when I tell you, man, I was hella scared to go deliver the paper to that house at the end of this long hallway in a dark building. And then they would have like they would have a cross in front of their house, in front of their door, and they would always have it upside down. And I knew it was upside down because it had skulls drawn on it that were like right side up. And then they would have like these little offerings around the door and like a pentagram on the door. And I was like, man, they're going to get me one day. I know they're going to get me one day. And so as part of all that, when I first started the paper route, I would get a list of everyone who I delivered to, and I would have to go to their house and knock on their door and be like, excuse me, you owe $5.75 for the paper, or you owe this much, depending on, they got it only on the weekends or every day. Sundays were a big newspaper day. Like you had like thick ass papers. It was hard on Sundays. You knew Sundays was gonna be a challenge, but it was Sunday. You could deliver it a little bit later, and as part of that, I'll say that like my mom didn't know how to drive, and my dad would be like probably passed out from getting drunk. Wake up and say, man, fuck that fool. Let him figure it out himself about me. Because it'd be raining hard, and my mom would be like, hey, it's raining. Can you take him on this paper route? Fuck that motherfucker. That ain't my job. And so my mom would get in the car, go like 2 miles an hour. We lived in the neighborhood, so it wasn't like she had to go far, and she would drive like at 2 miles an hour, and we'd throw the newspaper. Rest in peace, Mom, and thank you for that. So that was my experience as a businessman, and that lasted for like 2 months because somebody had challenged the newspaper for making the kids take the loss if someone didn't want to pay their bill. They would say, hey, I never ordered the paper. It just started coming, and I'm not paying. And the newspaper would make like 12-year-olds eat that cost. Like, well, you're the businessman. You got to figure it out. And someone was like, man, fuck that. These are little kids. You taking advantage of them by making them eat that cost. And so then after that, you were like an employee of the paper, and they paid you. I think it went something like that. I'm going to say allegedly because I ain't trying to speak bad on the newspaper or smut them up, because they got more power to smut me up than vice versa, right? So, but it was cool, and it was empowering when they told you were a businessman, and when you did collect and it all went well, it was good. it was rewarding, and I'm grateful that I was a paper boy at one time. And I don't know if I said it, but there was a video game called Paperboy, where you are on your BMX and you're trying to hit all the houses where you deliver the paper. It was an arcade game when they had arcades, and I think it even had like a little bike handlebars, and you would push the button to launch the newspaper, depending on what side you were on. So that was my business sense. Here's my business advice. That's my business experience, and here's my business advice. I think one, to recognize, if you've never done it, it's best to probably start small. The folks I see who have ran businesses and have ran them successfully, in my very limited experience, they had a job, and they had a good job. And because they had that good job, they were able to invest in things that would then make them money. One guy I knew had, he was by classification or, job description, he was an engineer. He had a 4-year science degree, not in engineering, but it was civil engineering. What is the work? And I think it's civil engineering. The union he belongs to is the engineers union. There we go. So the guy has this great job, and for someone with less drive, or different interests, it's man, I don't know where I'm taking, so I'm just gonna get to the point. So I know these dudes, right? Both of them have successful businesses. Both of them have jobs that, if none of their businesses worked, would still cover all of their bills. And that was not enough. Other folks, let's say me, would just buy a lowrider and be happy with the job. They weren't. Other folks, let's say me, would take the earnings from a good job and probably go out to eat every day. Go in the mornings for coffee with a coworker. In the afternoons, go for, maybe drinks or something with colleagues. And so what I noticed is that these dudes didn't really do all that, man. They brought their lunch. They didn't try to dress fancy. I mean, they wore nice quality things, but none of it stood out as, look at me. They might have a nice car. They might have a Toyota Tacoma or even a Tesla, but it doesn't have gold rims on it. It's not pounding. All that. There's no extras on it. And I do know people who do get the extras too, but they're also an example more of the me, in that they just have such a high salary, they can get the extras and it doesn't set them back. And I'll say they do international work for a major tech company. So these other guys, though, they're not flashy. They're not misspending their money. They learn to save. So that's instilled in them already. They learn to be patient, to play a long game. But most importantly, I think the best advice I could give to folks on business is one, you know, cut with the delusions of grandeur, business suits and manicured nails like Polly on the Sopranos, and, a life of leisure, dressed up, looking fancy, just talking about things and making things happen. That might work in the criminal world, but in a society world, um, I think it's a lot of sacrifice, and a lot of hard work, um, and a lot of believing in yourself. That it's coming, and you see it. One of the examples that I was thinking of, and like I said, they're pretty similar in that only one is, we'll say, Latinx, the other one is AAPI, which is Asian, more specifically Mexican and Vietnamese. They I think it was in their personality to just be successful at business, because they like to work, they like to stay busy, um, and they like to be productive. Something interesting from one of them was that despite this professional white collar salary and career, on the weekends he mowed lawns. He was a landscaper. He was the little Mexican vato with the hat, darker complected than me. Um, I would say, like, humble and like servile. And some people think of servile as, and I hope I'm enunciating it right, as lowly. But I was reading this book one time, and they were talking about one of the most legendary Italian crime figures, Carlo. And someone had described him as servile as well, to clown him. And if you know that guy's story, he was everything but that, and as far as being a G. And so I always saw it as being humble. And so I'm saying this dude was humble. And, like I said, these are folks that would sacrifice. They're reinvesting their money into growing their world. And when he finally grew his world enough to make a complete switch, like countries and careers and everything, he walked away from this job that I'm sure people with PhDs, master's degrees, and engineering degrees applied for. And he told me that he made more money as a landscaper than he did in that job that all those people with those nice degrees are applying for. He made more as a gardener than in that capacity. And he took all that together to start a whole new thing. And, I hope he's doing well. I haven't talked to him since he left. And then I got a new phone, so I lost the number. But the other one, he owns like several salons, and they're just, whenever you run into them, they're always doing something. They're not laying around. They're not lounging. They're always doing something. And so I think folks need to recognize their personalities and look at business as sacrifice, and then try to do it from the perspective of you have a solid foundation that covers your bills. I think as it applies to YouTube, having, my separate career, I have the freedom to do what I think is best with my YouTube channel. Whether I get views or I don't, it doesn't affect my ability to provide for my family. And so it lets me be true to me. I don't have to clutch at straws or think of stuff to come up with. I can just talk about stuff that I think is important to me. And the reason I'm making this video is because I do hear folks like talk about business, and the impression I get is that it's seen through this lens as something glamorous, and the folks that I see who were good at it, they weren't doing it for glamour. They weren't doing it for glory. They were just people who had this core constitution of discipline and humility and a good work ethic. Like, unless you're shady, I don't know how you do good at business without a good work ethic. So that means you might need to just have a job that affords you the comfort of launching ventures with the freedom to fail. Yeah, no one sets out to fail, but if you have a job, that gives you the freedom to launch business ventures more comfortably and maybe more boldly, because it's not being done from a place of desperation. And all that said, the lily pads, that was a one-off. The fish, I don't do that anymore. That was a one-off. Because it wasn't in my personality. And, I went one time to the Bay Area and I went to this house that was on a golf course. And the guy had 2 Mercedeses in his driveway, like identical, one his, one his wife. They were new. And he said that all that was paid for from breeding and selling fish. And we were there because my friend was buying 2 fish that had mated. So they were there, and they were a mated pair. And he was paying, I think, $1,600 for those 2 fish. So, and the reason they were getting them is because me, him, and like 2 other people who were scientists were all competing to see who could breed these fish first. Because you got to get the conditions perfect for them. But once you're breeding them, the mom and dad, if you have a good mom and dad, and that what makes them more expensive, they might have 100 fish that you're selling for $20 a pop to any pet store. Like, they just buy them off you. That guy had the work ethic to build that shit up. I was just happy to be the first one to breed them. And then moved on. Like, I wanted a new challenge. So it's not my personality to be a businessman. And that said, I still have the hubris to offer you business advice based on what I've seen from other people, not because I've done it and succeeded. Anyways, much love. I hope you have a good one.